Perfect, let's get cracking. Thank you so much for choosing this track. Happy Thanksgiving if we have any US members in the room or in the audience. Catalin Neacsu is my name, and today we're going to be talking about threat modeling, a comprehensive approach to achieving a cybersecurity defense strategy. Now, a few words about myself. I've been in the industry for about 15 years now. I wore different hats in defensive cybersecurity, in offensive, done a bit of pen testing in my life. Recently, I've been a bit into development, and of course, generative AI is the latest added thing. During this time, I gathered a few certifications, which I listed at the bottom of the screen. You're going to see there are a few commands which I've executed, a few tools that I've played with in my career so far. Right, it doesn't get easy in our industry, does it? Right, I've been around 15 years, and it doesn't feel like, phew, I know it all now. On the contrary, the tech is evolving very, very rapidly. And it feels like cybersecurity is catching up with that. There are multi-cloud deployments, microservices now, and sometimes it's even hard to understand where your data resides. So it's challenging for us, and it continues to be even more challenging. The code there totally applies, at least for me in my career. The more you know, you understand that actually the bear is bigger. And of course, this cybersecurity budget is not always flexible enough. The cybersecurity decision makers always have to pivot with budgets, choose where to make their investments properly. Unless you are maybe a cybersecurity vendor where the streaming revenue is cybersecurity itself, in many of the cases, cybersecurity is a cost center. It's a supportive operations. And what cybersecurity leaders do? Well, many times they are in firefighting mode. They put out the most important fire. They try to jungle with their budget, retain employees, adopt new technologies, and stay ahead of the cybersecurity industry. It's a firefighting mode, and the topic for today is going to be an alternative to that. In my opinion, in order to organize your cybersecurity program, it needs to work in tandem with your business. You need to understand the landscape of your organization. You need to understand the business you are in, the streaming revenues, because those are the assets that you need to protect as a cybersecurity practitioner. And how we do that? Well, hopefully, today we're going to be talking about one option. And on top of the more challenging cybersecurity landscape, there are many regulations coming into the picture, and we see that in the EU as well. I'm not going to deep dive into any of these. I'm sure there are smarter people in the room that can talk about this. But what I will mention is that threat intelligence is no longer a buzzword. Threat intelligence is becoming a norm. It's being mentioned in regulations, and it's being required in many domains nowadays. And with that context, that brings us to our agenda for today. We're going to be talking about threat modeling, a three-step approach to sync, to understand your organization, to understand your business, and sync your cybersecurity program with that. The three-step approach: know yourself, know your enemies, and bridge the gaps. And of course, generative AI is becoming in the picture, and I think it has really, really good applicability in threat modeling. I mean, we're going to be talking about that too. There was something else down there, I'm not sure. But the ones working in threat intelligence are really familiar with this. This is a threat intel pyramid of pain, right? It's usually a way that a threat intel program will be organized, starting from the bottom up, climbing up the pyramid. At the bottom, there should be another one with hashes. Nevertheless, the topic that I wanted to point is that threat modeling is one of the more complex activities in threat intel. But what is threat modeling? In my opinion, in a few words, it's a way to link cybersecurity to your business. It is a team sport. It's very important to mention that because in larger organizations, they would know it's very hard to identify somebody that has very good knowledge about the organization. So you need to bring that knowledge in during threat modeling. You need to have different perspectives from different areas of your organization. It needs leadership, support, and sponsorship. Without their blessing, you will not be having the right engagement for threat modeling. And as a business moves and progresses, so does the cybersecurity landscape of that organization. So you need to repeat, right? Of course, the first iteration of threat modeling will be harder because you might start from scratch, but going forward is going to be a repetitive, a rinse and repeat kind of a process. There are a few threat modeling frameworks out there, and I wanted to mention that because if you are starting, you definitely want to, if you are starting with threat modeling, you definitely want to have a look at this. Stride, Pasta, and Octave, they are really good resources. If your organization uses any of these, I totally recommend, you are in a good shape, totally recommend to put more effort into it and evolve from there. Today's approach, and now we are kind of getting into the meat of the presentation, the three-step approach starts with knowing yourself, right? Understanding your organization from different angles. Many of us in cybersecurity, we are tech people, and I know that I am tech, so I understand technology. It comes easier for me to understand the technology stack, to understand the internet exposure. But for an efficient threat modeling process, you need to add the business side of things. You need to understand in which verticals your company works, which are your main customers, right? Because the threat actor might be after your customer, and they would look at you as a supply chain vector of infection. You need to look at your competitors. Which are your biggest competitors in the market? And why is that useful? Because if one of your biggest competitors are targeted by a threat actor, I think that's a lessons learned for you as well, because you might want to review and understand if you would be affected by the same threat, and how can you protect it. So definitely for cybersecurity people, it's hard to have that business. So you need to identify stakeholders within your organization that can bring that knowledge in. From operations, from marketing, why not, from from the selling department, they have a different perspective of your organization. When you ask them, what's my most important answer, you're going to get different answers. But you need all of that because you can sum it up, right? The assets of an organization can look different depending on where you are, but with all that bundle of information, you can distinguish easier what's actually pretty important for your company. And you need to think at what's the secret sauce, if you will. What is the thing that your organization does better? What makes it competitive in the market? Because that's what you need to protect. You are there to protect your organization, right? And at the end of the day, I would sum those important bits as crown jewels. And they can have different shape or form. Maybe it's your customer data. Maybe it's your source code. Maybe it's the relationship and the partnerships you have. Now, depending on how those crown jewels look like, what they are, and where they sit within your organization, there are different protection mechanisms that you need to consider for adequate protection. At the end of the day, you're going to understand your security posture, and I would call it your digital identity, your organization's digital identity. Moving on to the next step, right? This is like the know yourself. You will go now and understand, research a bit, and try to understand which threat actors, which threat groups might have an interest in your organization, in your digital identity, in your crown jewels. How do you do that? If you already have a relationship with a cybersecurity vendor, well, the majority of them employ a threat actor database. That's an excellent start. You know your organization. Oh, there. You know your organization, and you know what those threat actors might be after. And you need to review if you fit the bill. If you fit their area of interest, geopolitical interest, the type of business you are in. So, of course, first review point would be the threat actors database of a cybersecurity vendor. But if you don't have that, fear not. There are so many public available resources pretty well, and I'm going to enumerate a few of them. Definitely start with MyThreatAttack. They have a threat groups section, many threat actors documented, and it's a pretty good starting location. You can monitor, well, many security vendors and independent researchers make their work public. And that's something that you can easily benefit from. You can look at those threat campaigns, which are really well dissected, plenty of articles out there. And you need to ask yourself, is that threat, is that campaign applicable to my organization? Because that's a lessons learned for you. And of course, the last, but definitely not the least important, is your own casework. Hopefully by now you have a case management platform where you properly document your incident response cases, including TTPs, including modus operandi that you've seen during that incident. That is pretty valuable for your threat modeling operation because that's actually real data that you've seen within your organization. It cannot get better than that. Right? So this is the know your enemies. You will be after the TTPs, the tools, techniques, and procedures of the threat actors that might have an interest in your organization. By now, in the first step, you understood where you are, your current state, right? And in step 2, you understood your possible threat actors of interest, which is the goal state. In many cases, you're going to have a gap. You're going to have a roadmap between the two. Well, that's actually what will drive your cybersecurity program. You need to understand that gap, realize the gap, and work towards remediating and bridging the gap. And it allows you to prioritize investments, consider training, consider new technologies adoption. And we're going to be showing, I'm going to be walking you through how threat modeling can look like. It's a threat modeling platform which I developed and designed, matching this three-step approach. When a bit of history, when I started thinking about threat modeling, of course, I ended up looking at the frameworks available out there. But I'm a technical person, and I didn't really see the technical applicability, the technical relation, how I can transport that into developing my program. So I ended up on an article written by Andy Piazza, which I totally recommend for you to look out on Google. And it really inspired for us to start a threat modeling program, which looks like this. The threat modeling platform has this is the starting page, if you will, right? It has an input section where you define your current state, your TTPs. That's step 2, actually, here. And you'll define, you'll review, and identify the threat actors which will be interested in your organization. The platform comes with libraries, built-in libraries of threat actors, but you can definitely create custom ones as you need. And in the results pane, you're going to see the gap, right? You're going to have a representation about the gap and suggestions, improvement suggestions. Depending on how the organization is set up, depending on how big your organization is, you might want to split the threat modeling effort per cost centers, per business units, because if you are a large enough organization, you're going to operate in different verticals. Each one of them might require an independent threat modeling effort because there might be a different landscape. Or you can do an all-in-one as a starting point, but I totally recommend to consider how your organization operates. So in my demo, you start by defining, give it a name, you give the threat modeling a name. And then you go and evaluate your TTPs. This is tedious work, right? You need to review your existing SIEM, WAF, detection technologies, and understand which TTP you have good coverage. Of course, you can import a TTP, but when you import, you need to give it 2 scores, visibility and detection, and that's pretty important. And visibility represents the level of visibility you have for that particular TTP. Do you have enough logging? are the logs, will those logs arrive in my SIEM in the proper way? Am I formatting those in the right way? That's a score that you need to evaluate from 0 to 5. And the majority of TTPs have different procedures, different implementations. I would call that the death of a TTP. You need to evaluate the TTP and see for which of those particularities you have detections in place. And then you give it another score from 0 to 5. It's going to be your own assessment in terms of the scoring. And after you rinse and repeat that a few times and you cover all of the TTPs for your organization, the platform generates a MITRE ATT&CK heat map for your organization. This is your current state. You're going to see different color coding dependent on the scoring that you gave to that particular TTP. This is something that you can share with leadership and present. This is my current state. This is where we are at, what we are protected against. And then we go to the possible threat actors. And you can start from the threat actors library in the platform, or you can create your own threat actors. And once you select a threat actor, you're going to have description, information about the threat actor, a bit of modus operandi information. You're going to have aliases. We do really well in giving catchy names in cybersecurity, so you're going to have a lot of that. But what's utmost important from my perspective is the list of TTPs, the attack patterns that you're going to see there in the middle of the screen. Those are pretty important, right? Because if you identify the threat actor, you know which TTPs you need to protect against that threat actor. And when you decide to import one of the threat actors within your threat modeling effort, you need to give it, again, 2 scores. One is capability, which speaks to the complexity, to how advanced that threat actor is. You need to ask yourself questions such as, is it a nation-state sponsored? Is it a threat actor that builds their own tooling, their own CNC servers, their own 0 days? If that's a more advanced threat actor, and you're going to give it a high score, right? On the other hand, you might have script kiddies or threat actors that use off-the-shelf kind of products. Those might still be advanced, but definitely a lower scoring. And then you need to evaluate the intent, the likelihood of that threat actor to be after you. Maybe they just look at your organization as a supply chain infection vector, maybe just a target of opportunity. Maybe you have Apache open to the internet and they know how to exploit Apache, just giving a wild example. So you might be just a target, they target your organization just because they can, and it's easy. And then you give it another score, intent score from 0 to 5. And you rinse and repeat. You identify all of the threat actors that might have an interest within your organization. You select them, you give them scoring, and the platform generates a threat matrix plotting the threat actors that you have identified for your organization. Of course, it's intent and capability on X and Y axis there, and you're going to have different coloring to understand the more important threat actors. Worth to mention that the threat actors that you see here depicted, they might have different scoring for a different organization. So the order is important here, which are more important and more applicable to your organization. So by now, you've documented where you are, your current TTPs, and where you want to be, which are the TTPs for the threat actors that you have identified. Now, the platform generates a gap assessment automatically between the two visualization. And you're going to see here a total coverage score representing the difference between the TTPs you have and the TTPs deployed by the threat actor. And you're going to see different scoring per each tactic of MITRE ATT&CK. Now, in my experience in cybersecurity, it's really hard to come up with a metric that represents the maturity of a cybersecurity program. How do you measure success, right? Well, I think that total coverage score, it's a really well metric that you can use. You can start from a number, and you can have a roadmap towards improving that number with years. And you can go with to your security leadership documenting the progress that was made in the past few years. And of course, an eye candy visualization, right? The same MITRE ATT&CK gap is available here, and you're going to see depicted with red the TTPs for which you don't really have adequate detections. And those are the TTPs that the cybersecurity program needs to grow towards. In here, I've just selected two TTPs. The one on the left-hand side has a decent scoring, 3 and 2, and it is present in my threat actors list. But the gap is small, so the color is green. On the right-hand side, you're going to see a TTP for which I haven't documented anything, and therefore it's red. It's something that you might want to take care of. For each TTP, MITRE ATT&CK does a good job at identifying mitigation opportunities, such as technology investments. Depending on the gaps identified in this analysis, you're going to have mitigations prioritized per the difference of the gap. The bigger the gap is, the more the color turns into red, and it's something that you might consider into growing your security program. SSL TLS inspection is one of the mitigations that kind of bubbled up during this demo. On the flip side, you're going to have mitigations with lower priority because you already have TTPs, you already have adequate, you've documented adequate detections capabilities. And those, although there is a gap, the gap is smaller, so the color is more friendlier, let's say. So that's pretty much threat modeling in a nutshell. If done well, it really has the possibility of a cascading, cascading within your information security program and in your organization. You will have a better understanding of where you are and where you want to be. You can talk. You can address your security leadership in more of their language, talking business, talking to protect the business, which is definitely something that they will appeal on. You know how to better organize threat intel consumption, which development efforts you need to do for improving TTPs. I apologize for the way they are represented. I promise they were in their correct bubbles there. And when you write threat intel reports or briefings towards your audience, which most probably is your leadership, you will have better context about your own organization, how it affects it. But the one that I love, actually, is threat intel-led red teaming. You can go to your red team with a list of threat actors, with a list of TTPs that you want emulated within your in the next campaign. You know exactly what you want to do by now, right? So you can give them the list. I'm sure that they will resonate to that, knowing how red teaming is, and you're going to have a really good collaboration with the red team. Another effect that threat modeling has within your organization is to avoid FOMO, a fear of missing out, right? Why is that? Because when you have to decide investments or adopting a new technology, although it might be in trend, it might be the hottest new technology out there, I know that I'm attracted by new shiny technologies, you can avoid that. You can understand that maybe your program isn't mature enough, isn't ready for that new technology. Maybe you need to wait a bit more, or maybe you have other technologies, other detections, other mechanisms that you need to protect and you need to employ before that. So it allows you to structure your mindset and your program. And generative AI is coming big time into the picture nowadays. I think it has really, really good applicability in threat modeling too. I'm sure by now everybody in the room started to work with public available large language models. And they are amazing, aren't they? The one thing that a public available LLM will never know, will never have enough information of, it's your own organization, your particular context, right? Details about your technology stack. When you ask it a question, it will answer with general information. But what if you make it and it answered in the context of your organization? That's the proposal that I'm going to be presenting here. There are two ways to achieve that. One is you build your own large language model with the information that you gather from your organization, which I think is the harder way. Probably more efficient, you're gonna have better data, but it's harder because you need to have specialized engineers that know how to build an LLM. It's very costly, so it's a decision that you need to make. The easier option, which is what I'm suggesting here, is to employ RAG, Retrieve Augmented Generation. It's a way through which you use existing LLM, but instead of allowing them to respond with their public available information, you give it a database of context, let's say. And when they present your answers back, instead of presenting with public information, they use the context you already given in the vector encoded database, and then you're going to have an answer brought back with the right context. And of course, you can put in threat modeling datasets and other pieces of information in the vector DB database. On the right-hand side, it's a typical RAG architecture. It's nothing new under the sun. You can develop, it's an architecture for a chatbot, which is, imagine it as your partner, right, during investigations, during threat modeling, during any conversations. It's your partner that can ask questions and you can have really, really fast answers. In the next few slides, I'm just going to give you an example of how this can be useful, right? I'm sure that many of us in our career were asked about a particular high-risky CV, high-risky vulnerability. In this example here, there are news about a remote code execution vulnerability affecting mock software enterprise server 4.0 to 4.8. That doesn't exist, it's just an example. And I'm sure that you know how to answer when your leadership addresses that. You're going to look into vulnerability management platform, into your asset inventory, and you're going to evaluate your organization's exposure to the threat. But that might take a while. It might require you to go into multiple tools to gather the information and distill it in a meaningful way. What if you have all of your asset information, all of your vulnerability management information brought into the RAG? Then you can ask it a plain English language, evaluate my exposure to this CV. And it goes, retrieves the data, analyzes the data for you, and prioritize the answers. And from the 3 hits below, 1 is exposed to the internet, DC is 1, while the others aren't. Then typically when I look at the criticality of vulnerability, I look at the likelihood of exploitation of that particular vulnerability. And the likelihood, the exploitability factor, is understandable from 2 factors. Is there a public available exploit code for that vulnerability? Are there any existing campaigns targeting that particular vulnerability? Are there any dark web forums chatting about the vulnerability? All of that information brought together, it brings context about the exploitability of the vulnerability. Now, if you hook up your OSINT deep dark web monitoring program with your threat modeling datasets, you can ask a question and it's going to have the response readily available for you. In my example, there was POC exploit codes available on GitHub. There are a few active campaigns in the wild. There are a few threat actors chatting about this vulnerability on dark web. So therefore, all of that context brought together kind of increases the risk of the vulnerability. And brought together my exposure and external information, such as the exploitability, allows you to evaluate your risk exposure of your organization, right? Maybe you can hook up incident response playbooks or vulnerability management playbooks within your RAG. And if you do that, the RAG will give you back information with context of the steps that you need to do next according to your existing playbooks. So why is this useful? Because I think you can scale up very easily from here. There are many threats typically out there on the internet, and hooking up your RAG with your existing information allows you to automate evaluation and responses of threats available on the internet. So that's kind of the challenge and the gist of threat modeling, hooking threat modeling with generative AI technology. All right, and that wraps it up. I think we are 30 minutes in, and we still have 15 minutes for questions. I hope you enjoyed it. I'm open to questions. The mic is coming.
So what I wanted to ask was, in your platform where you could import actors, you needed to define the capability of an actor. But isn't that something independent of your program, of your use case? Isn't that something that the actor just has and should be completed automatically?
It totally does. It's not in your control, the capabilities of a threat actor. You can only identify if the threat actor might have an interest within your organization, because you need to learn from their skill set and what they do within their operations, because that's what you want to protect against.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Thank you for the question.
Now, since we have touched upon this topic, do you have any automated way of correlating threat campaigns to your application?
It's combining the open source or deep and dark web monitoring programs. Yes, the way it works, you start by keywords, right, or sentences, like my organization name and attack, right? And if there are any hits on OSINT deep dark web, that will come back to your the platform as an alert. And you can include threat actors, like if you have identified 3-4 threat actors that might have an interest in your organization, you can put that on your monitoring list. And you're going to be notified continuously whenever that threat actor might have a campaign going on.
Okay. That's an interesting one. So from this perspective, the threat modeling platform that you're developing, who is the target audience? Because it doesn't sound to be, let's say, developers. You may need specialized security people who can actually do this correlation and basically validate if a threat campaign is valid for your organization or not, right?
Yeah, well, that's a really good question. How mature you are in order to approach such a threat modeling program? I think that's the gist of the question, which is very legitimate. Well, it depends. You can have cybersecurity consultancy services to help you in identifying the TTPs and help you evaluate your existing TTPs. Or maybe you can grow your program into adopting this approach and thinking about security in this manner. But definitely there is a cybersecurity service option. There are many organizations out there offering that.
Okay, one last question. I don't know if there are other questions in the meantime, but the last one, promise. So with regards to the data feeds that you are adding to your RAG, don't you think that's also something that can be tampered with if you are automatically looking on the dark web and such? Can't I just manipulate your data set by, posting different articles on the dark web?
Okay, really interesting. You can definitely have false positives within this. Yeah, if there is a channel, a Telegram channel that you monitor, and it might just share fake news, yeah, you might get alerted by it, and you're going to have your security analyst review that and dismiss the information quite quickly. Or on the other hand, it might accelerate an investigation. It might waste a bit of time. Yes, but it's typically the data sources are selected. It's a continuous effort in identifying, adding, eliminating some of them. If you see a data source that is not useful, you're gonna look elsewhere. You're gonna start looking elsewhere, and they get stale pretty easily. So it's a continuous effort to maintain that list. Yes.
So I was curious about deployment, and from the moment that the platform gets deployed, how long does it take a typical organization for until they start actually using the data that the platform generates. And sorry, and I also had another question, whether you deploy it on-prem or you provide it in a software as a service model, or...
At the moment, it's only SaaS.
Okay, cool.
But in terms of how easily it can be used, it can become effective, it really depends on the maturity of the existing cybersecurity program, because many teams already work with TTPs and they have that information readily available. For them, it's easy. But if you don't have a clear understanding about what your detections are, what tooling you have and what TTPs you cover, it can get tedious. Yes, it could be an effort, an uphill effort indeed. So it really depends on the maturity of the existing team. It's hard for me to estimate because it's going to be a per team basis. Yeah. Thank you for your question.
Given the rapid evolution of cyber threats, how often should a threat model be revised, and what factors would trigger a reassessment? And also, how do you handle false positives? Like, how do you evaluate the data sources?
Yeah, very good question. So, how often the information gets stale? And I think it can get stale if your business evolves, and it does. If your organization evolves, if you have an acquisition, for example, your organization has an acquisition, well, the landscape changes, right? So does security, so does threat modeling. So it's a catch-up. I'm sure that the business likely grows from one year to another. So I would advise to consider threat modeling on a yearly basis, at least on a yearly basis. It's a rinse and repeat process. It will never stop. Ideally, it will never stop. Ideally, you're going to be in a situation where your company grows and you need to grow with it. So that's a good situation. What was the last question?
How do you evaluate the data sources for the false positives?
Well, mainly from the complaints that you get from your customers, right? If you get too many false alerts, you're gonna see your customers shouting at you. It's going to be pretty obvious. But it's a continuous process of evaluating the data sources, their efficiencies. Many new Telegram channels appear on a daily basis, so it's an effort to keep up to date on that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Of course. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. First of all, thank you for the presentation. It's always nice to see new insights. I wanted to ask, how would you approach moving from tactical and operational intelligence in threat modeling towards something more strategic? So obviously we are talking about TTPs, indicators, crown jewels, but in the case of a global organization, let's say 20,000 systems, probably more, thousands of different technologies, M&As coming many times per year, you obviously need a more strategic threat model that doesn't change with every single addition to the organization, and you can't possibly integrate all of your attack surface. So how would you approach kind of moving to a more abstract strategic level in terms of a threat model?
Good question. In my opinion, you will... in my opinion, it's a good news that you'll never have a defined target, your end goal. The target that you have moves, right? The cybersecurity landscape moves. There are new threats against Kubernetes, for example, right? You have a new technology like generative AI. We now need to protect generative AI, right? 2 years ago, we haven't. But if your organization evolves, considers generative AI, your threat modeling evolves as well because you need to consider the new threat vectors. So to me, that's ideal that is not a defined end goal. And cybersecurity strategy, as you pointed out, don't need to have massive changes for monitoring because it's going to be confusing for everybody. But you don't do cybersecurity strategy on a daily basis, do you, right? It's probably going to be a near review, right? When you go and analyze your budget, your next year budget, your next quarter budget, that's when you're going to be reevaluating your posture and what needs to happen next.
All right, thanks. And also, speaking on large organizations, any tips on mapping out your internal systems and actually scaling threat modeling? Because here you can consider all the angles, given that you have all the technologies in there. But if you end up with 5,000 different things that you have to monitor, do you have any tips, opinions on actually taking all that information in and using it to actually get a valuable threat model?
Yeah, it's very well put, because you kind of described our challenges in our days. You have so many systems, so many asset inventory, they are changing, they are dynamic, how do you cope with that? Well, ideally, there is a tool for each question, right? You would have a properly enabled asset inventory that provides a clear glass view about your fleet. If you don't have that, yes, you might be affected in threat modeling. You are dependent on that technology. And that's a finding. If you find your organization in that situation, maybe you are not mature enough for threat modeling. And that's a good news. Maybe that's where you need to invest. Having a proper asset inventory, that's kind of a basic need for any organization. So maybe that's the next step. You achieve the basics, and then you break the barrier into moving to the next step, which can be threat modeling.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you. There was a question here.
So I've seen the data with the threat actors and associated TTPs. But in reality, at least to my knowledge, majority of attacks do not have an actor behind. They are hard to assess who is behind and so on. How would you adapt the application and your trend landscape for the customers for such attacks?
Yeah, so it really depends on the maturity of your program. If many of the cybersecurity vendors sit on a pile of data of threat actor campaigns, and they can do the attribution part. Attribution is hard and very easy to mistake, so I wouldn't necessarily recommend doing that. What would be my recommendation is that you cluster your own casework. You have an incident, you document your TTPs. I'm sure that that's something that any security program can do, and you can give it a random name. You don't need to associate that unless you have maybe a security vendor helping you with that, or maybe you see signs of the campaigns you're looking, you see signs on the internet discussed, and you see the resemblance. Sometimes it happens. That's when you want to do the attribution part. But I would typically avoid attribution. I would do clustering, and I would use those clusters, or maybe fake threat actors, fake clusters, import them in threat modeling as, I don't know, threat actor 002. Doesn't matter, it's just a name. You need the TTPs. Those are utmost important for threat modeling.
Thank you. Makes sense.
Thank you. There was another.
Thank you. How important do you think it is to make a thorough research on the threat actors and on threat groups in developing your product, for example?
So how important, let me see if I got the question right. How important is to research threat actors, or?
Exactly, yeah, and threat groups, yeah.
Well, as a business, they evolve. So it's pretty important to keep up to date what I plan of doing. And there are some tools available out there, is to continuously monitor as many threat actors as possible, keep in touch to what they do, research available campaigns, and continue updating the libraries. And of course, any users of the platform can add their own threat actors. They might know better what's important for them. They might have this custom cluster information that, of course, nobody will have access to it. But that's a very good point. It's very important to keep information up to date for as much as possible because there are new threat vectors on a daily basis. Yeah.
And do you think you can keep up with their how they evolve and how they transform their approaches?
Monitoring all of the threat actors is it's a big boys game. I do not claim that I can do that, of course. At the end of the day, anybody can create their own threat actors, their own custom threat actors that they may have an interest. Claiming to monitor them all is very hard, probably even for a cybersecurity vendor. So that's a hard one. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So thanks. Is the three-step threat modeling process appropriate for a team of developers which are releasing changes to production much often, let's say in an agile environment?
Well, it totally is because you kind of understood your crown jewels. If you are focused on a team of developers, it's the source code that it's your most important asset to your organization. I think it's definitely appropriate because that's what you want to protect. You want to understand commits, you want to understand GitHub's syncs, right? And a tricky one, you might understand, and I've seen that happening in the wild, developers are open to sharing. So many of them will have their own GitHub repos on the internet because they want to share, they want to provide back to the community. Well, sometimes some of your production information might end up in those buckets. And you don't want to do that, especially you don't want to have secrets exposed there. So I think it's very, very important because you actually started from a really good angle. You know your crown jewels. So you know exactly what you want to protect.
Thanks. Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah. All right, I think we are at time. I had the blast and hoped so did you. Thank you so much for your time, for being present today, and enjoy the rest of your conference.